This is Single Status. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Single Status Podcast. This is your host, Samantha, and I'm so happy that you are all here with me today. We have a special guest with us, Hannah Hughes from the Bywords podcast. And it's so cool because we actually met through a mutual follower friend on TikTok that connected us, and we're both women of faith, and we have positive uplifting content that I think she saw some similarities with there. So I'm so happy that she connected us, and welcome to the show. Welcome to Single Status.
I am so honored to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
And Hannah actually is married. She has 2 children, and she just has so much wisdom and encouragement for us, and also realness with her story that she's going to share. And I'm so excited to dive into your story.
Yeah, I'm excited. Yeah, you just tell me where you want me to start. I'm happy to dive in anywhere.
Okay, cool. Yeah, let's just start at the beginning. Wherever you want to start.
Yeah. Okay, well, for those who haven't listened, y'all have to come over to my podcast and listen to Samantha's episode, because we talked a lot about like the differences in our upbringing. I know you mentioned you didn't really grow up in the church world, whereas I grew up in the church world, and actually in the era of purity culture and the true love waits, ring, like the whole 9. So I grew up in this time period where there was so much emphasis on dating and marriage and like courting versus casual dating and all of that. And so that was kind of the world that I grew up in. That was my background for dating, relationships, kind of my perspective on the whole bit, and marriage especially. So growing up, I didn't date a whole lot in high school. It's so annoying and funny. I always tell people whenever I talk about my dating experience, like I was clueless. Okay. Like I had my first boyfriend when I was in 8th grade. We didn't even really talk to each other. It was just this guy I knew at church. And then we would see each other at youth group on Wednesdays, and that was it. It was like, okay, we're dating, but not really. Anyways, we broke up, not surprisingly. And so I dated this other guy from my school. Well, he and I broke up, and I actually started dating the first guy again. And we dated for a while, and then we broke up, and I got back together with the second guy again. So like, it was just a real mess. I had no idea what I was doing, but that was my high school dating experience. And that was pretty much the extent of it. There was nothing serious really about those relationships that I really thought would last. But my senior year of high school, I experienced some sexual abuse, and it was very shocking to me, having, a fairly like normal upbringing in childhood. I mean, I'm very open about my story. I've written a book about it as well. I struggled a lot with body image, eating disorders, insecurity, mental illness, and all of that was kind of in my junior high and high school experience. But when I got to my senior year and I experienced this abuse, it kind of was just like this nail in the coffin, I guess, for my self-worth and my confidence, especially in relationships, because it was people I knew who molested me. And it was actually, it was just the craziest experience, because it happened to friends the first time. And then a month later, I was raped by somebody else that I knew. And so in a very short span of time, my life was just flipped upside down. And of course, if you talk to people who have experienced sexual abuse, especially later on in life, it takes a long time for it to actually sink in and like process, like, was that actually what it was? Like, was this my fault? Did I consent to this? Like, did I just not say no enough? Like, all of those things were going through my mind. And so for a long time, I just didn't talk about it. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't tell anyone about it. I kind of just moved on with my life, tried to go throughout the rest of my senior year like normal. And then I went to college. So from there, I met a guy, and let me preface this by saying I went to Bible college, and it was this whole thing as part of the culture where it was like, you devote your first year to singleness and just being with the Lord, and like you don't date, like you're just focusing on God. It was this whole like church camp vibe situation. So I'm going
Wow.
into it with this mindset of like very kind of legalistic thinking about
Yeah.
dating at my Bible college. And all the while, I'm like trying to enjoy my time there, but this guy starts catching my eye. And it's a mutual thing. And we realize, okay, like maybe we're into each other, but we're not going to date. And he's like, I want to respect your first year here. Like, I don't want you to date. And so, already from the right off the bat, it was kind of like this weird situation where it was like rules and all of this weird stuff. So, long story short, we actually end up dating, and it was great. Like, it was just such a sweet relationship in the beginning. Like we were really convinced we were going to get married, like planning to get married. I went out of state to meet his family. Like we were from different places. He met my family, he came and stayed with my family, and we just did everything together, and we dated for about a year. And all of a sudden, things started just spiraling out of control. And the short version is, as we got closer, like, just emotionally closer and then also physically closer, like, our relationship was progressing. And a lot of my trauma started to surface. I started having flashbacks and being triggered by things as simple as like just holding his hand or being with him, or like little things he would say would set me off. And I just felt so unsafe, or just like hyper aware and insecure and all of these things. And so I realized, oh my gosh, I have all this trauma that I haven't dealt with. So I was going to counseling and getting therapy for this at the time. And really, for the first time, admitting or accepting really what happened to me as abuse. It was not my fault. It was not okay. And it changed me. And I have some things that I need to heal from. And so I was working on that on my own with my therapist, but it really started to cause some issues in our relationship. So for me, I was dealing with all this trauma and like kind of projecting it on him. So on my side, it's really unhealthy, and from a place of like, I'm just broken. And then he was actually struggling with a porn addiction at the time as well. And so that for me was also extremely triggering, because then he was getting frustrated with me being triggered by him. And so that pushed him further into his porn addiction, which pushed me further away from him and created all this division and tension in our relationship. And basically, it just spiraled out of control. It got extremely toxic very fast. He started pressuring me to do things that I felt were not safe. And I just didn't feel safe in the relationship anymore. And of course, again, it's just pushing him further and further away. And we end up breaking up. But I just felt very damaged from that relationship, because I just remember one moment in time where I was struggling so badly with my trust issues and feeling like I just was feeling all the effects of my trauma so loudly in my life. And he was like, you have to tell your parents and you have to get help for this, because at the time I still hadn't really told anybody besides like my counselor. And that was at the very beginning of processing. He was like, if you don't tell your parents about this, like, we can't stay together. Like, I can't be the only one who knows this. I can't help you through this on my own, which in a sense was fair. But I ended up telling my parents, and then we broke up the next week. So I felt completely abandoned.
Wow.
In a time of desperation, feeling like, I thought you were going to be there with me through this, and now you're saying that I'm too damaged. Like, you can't even do this with me. Like, you can't be here with me as I heal and go through this. Like, I thought you were the one for me. I thought we were planning to get married. Like, we had talked about everything and made the plans, and then all of a sudden we're broken up and I'm alone. And I am left with this big mess that I have to now clean up on my own. And that is basically where I was for most of my adult dating life. And it took me a very long time to process through that and heal. Because I got to a point where I was like, I'm never dating again. I can't do this. It's just too painful. It's too scary. It's too vulnerable. It's too raw. And like, who's going to want me? Like, I'm damaged goods, So that's kind of where I was at for a long time.
Oh. Well, thank you so much for being vulnerable and, sharing on the show. I know that will help a lot of people, knowing that they're not alone, whoever has gone through similar things. And I can relate in a sense of not dealing with certain things from my past, making me feel unworthy of being with someone, or someone that would treat me right. I mean, there was my listeners know that there was like a situationship that happened in a few years ago, and it was a moment of awareness for me because I felt like I actually was allowing that relationship to take place or this man to be in my life even though he was unsafe and not a good person to be around. I
Mm,
think because in my mind I was thinking, well, he's going to accept me because I'm too messed up. Like it's okay that he
yeah.
accepts me because I messed up because of my past. I had a lot of shame from things I did in my past that I wasn't dealing with. So I was like, okay, well, he's the only one that would, accept me. No one else is going to accept me. So I'm just going to stay in this relationship, which is such a horrible thing to, think about myself, like looking back at it. So it's interesting that you felt that in this relationship where you felt like who else would accept me, I'm damaged goods, how could
Yeah.
anyone else love me, like that kind of thing. So what practical steps did you take after that breakup to seek guidance and seek help to kind of heal from some of the things from your past, and how did you move forward from that?
Yeah, that's a huge piece. And like, that's such a good question because it is hard. And, everyone says healing isn't linear, and it's certainly not. I mean, it took me a very long time. It wasn't like I got this step by step thing, like this program from my therapist, and I just did the steps and it was fine. It's as with any pain, which I'm sure you experience as well. It's like choosing over and over again every day to show up and just one day at a time. And I think for me, a big piece of that was the shame I felt, not only around my abuse experience, but also now in this relationship where I had been physical with my boyfriend, not to the point of sex, but feeling shame even around that.
Hmm.
Because I was feeling like, oh, well, kind of circling back to the purity culture thing, virginity was everything. I'm
Yeah.
saving myself for marriage. And I, at that point, was like, well, am I technically not? Like, what's the point anymore? Like, I worked so hard to protect this piece of myself, and now it's been taken from me, and I'm just broken and damaged. And now I've been in this relationship with someone I thought I was going to marry. So I didn't really care anymore, you know? And now I'm no longer with him. And so I feel like I've got the shame from abuse. I've got the shame of giving myself away in other physical ways to this other guy who I thought was going to be my husband. And how do I reconcile that? Like, I just feel like a mess. And I just, it took me a long time to kind of like sort through that in my mind. And a lot of it I feel like came from just processing out loud with my therapist and having someone validate how I felt, and like, again, reinstating that the abuse was not my fault. And that even the actions I took, like the actions I consciously chose in my relationship with my boyfriend after that, God can forgive. Like, I don't have to stay stuck in that shame.
Yeah.
Like, I can choose now going forward to hold myself to a different standard in relationships, or even not even that, like not even a legalistic way, but just like approaching relationships differently. Like, there's forgiveness, there is grace. And so I got to a point for me where I was like, I just have to let God love those pieces of me that I feel like are unlovable. Because at that point, I wasn't letting anybody in because I didn't want anybody to see that I was broken. I didn't want anyone else to see that I was damaged. Like, who would, I just had all of those lies. Like, who would want me? Who would ever hear my story and then be like, oh, sure, sounds great. Like, let's date. I just felt very afraid that if anybody knew the real me, they would think I was gross. They would think that I was, just broken. And so I really slowly had to let people in. And once I started experiencing, even my therapists and close people, like once I told my parents, giving me grace and just saying that they love me and they want to be with me through the healing process, it started to heal those pieces of me that I really truly believed at that point were unlovable. Because, my boyfriend, he saw those pieces and he left. He thought it was too much. And so I started to really realize that, okay, God still loves me. So that was a huge foundational shift for me in my healing journey, was that God could still love me, even though I was broken and a mess, and that there could be still hope for a marriage in my future. And God could restore everything, like the Bible talks about how he restores the years that were stolen. And I felt that so much in my story. Like, I felt like every bit of my dating history and my abuse and like all the trauma and the brokenness I thought was like the end for me. but God really restored it. And he brought so much healing just as I gradually showed up. And like I said, it was a year-long process and it wasn't easy, but staying in it, I feel like was the biggest thing for me. So that's not really practical, tangible advice. Sorry. That's not like super helpful probably. But I would say the biggest thing for me was just being willing to commit to staying in the healing process when it would be easier just to give up and be
Yeah.
like, who cares at this point? I might as well just like date whoever I want. And, but I got to a point where I believed God loved me and that he really did have more goodness for me. And it wasn't because I was good enough to deserve it. It was just because he loved me and he wanted to heal me because I'm his. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yes. Wow. And it is so interesting how we beat ourselves up, and when we go through things, you had horrible things happen to you, and then you ended up in a couple situations, and then you started experiencing a lot of shame from those things. And then we have this narrative that, oh my gosh, I'm messed up. There's something wrong with me.
Mm,
They're going to judge me. They're going to think I'm like disgusting. They're going to think all these horrible things about me. And it's so interesting because as humans we all have things, and we think we're
right.
we're the only one that has these things. And so it's so interesting how we have that internal dialogue, and then
Mhm.
opening up to people how that can help and restore things. And another thing I thought was interesting about your story is how you started to understand that God loves you through all of that. And I think that's the difference between I didn't grow up in purity culture. And so I came to the Lord so messed up, and
Mm,
with all of my shame. And I always knew that God loved everything about me, even the thing, like through the things that I did wrong, or the things the messy, crazy things I did in my life. I always knew that God loved me. It was the people I was scared of. And so it's
yeah.
interesting. It was interesting, with you growing up in purity culture, how you had this mindset of, oh my gosh, God doesn't love me anymore. I feel ashamed. And so can you talk a little bit more about that? Like, how have you kind of reshaped your thinking when it comes to the ideals that you were raised with in purity culture, and what has helped you, for anyone else that maybe was raised like that, or anyone else that kind of still feels shame or guilt or from things that have happened before, feel like God doesn't love them. Like, I guess, could you share a little more on that
Yeah,
balance?
absolutely. Yeah, that's such a great question. And I'll be honest. Well, two things I'll be honest about. Number one, it's an ongoing thing for me. And secondly, I think part of it is my personality and the way that I'm wired is just very perform. I mean, if it means anything to the people who are listening, I'm an Enneagram 3. So very achievements, performance based.
Okay.
And so from the beginning, I just always felt like I had to perform in order to be good enough. And some of that was like in school, like academics, and my parents expecting a lot from me. But it really translated into my relationship with God, thinking he expected me to perform the same way. And so, whether it was purity culture or any part of faith where it was like, no sex before marriage, no cussing, no, like all of these really extreme legalistic rules that were put in place. And I mean, those are just a few examples, but it really got to a point for me where it was like, almost like in the Old Testament, where God gave them the 10 commandments, but then they made up all of these other rules so they didn't even get close to breaking the main few rules. It's kind of how I started operating as I was growing up. And so I built this perspective of God based on like, if I am good, if I'm a good Christian, if I do all the right things, then I deserve good things from God. He'll bless my life, he'll love me, and I'll see his faithfulness. And so for a very long time, that's how I operated. So when it came to things like purity culture and in my relationships, I felt like, okay, God will bless me with a good marriage and I'll find the one if I'm perfect and like save myself for marriage and do all of these things right. Okay. And then, of course, all of these things happen and I start feeling like, okay, I screwed up. So I don't deserve God's goodness. I expect probably that I will be punished. Like it's just probably going to happen. Like I deserve it. If bad things happen, I deserved this. I screwed up. And so it was a really messed up way to think about my relationship with God, but then I realized a lot of people actually feel this way about their relationship with God. Maybe not as blunt of terms or as straightforward about it as I may have explained, but I think a lot of the time we see God as this transactional relationship where it's like, okay, I do this, I follow your rules, you bless me, you provide for me, you're good to me, you love me. And so it's kind of shifted over time as I've realized, God loves me even when I screw up. I mean, God loves me even when I don't read my Bible. And to me, that was like earth shattering. I was like, what? You're kidding me. Like, I don't have to be perfect in order for God to love me. Like, I thought it was this: if I do this, then God is good, faithful, provider, all of that. But as I've grown in my relationship with God and even through my healing, I've just learned like what I believe to be true about God as a faithful God, a savior, as a father, it's disconnected from my performance. And that's a really hard thing to disconnect when it's been so intertwined for all of my life. And I feel like a lot of us who grew up in that kind of purity culture or legalistic religious environment. But what really helped me start to make that shift is like recognizing God is good no matter what I do. And he's going to love me like he loved me before I had a chance to prove I was worthy of being loved. And so again, it was a long process of kind of undoing what I had believed, but I just have had to switch my perspective on that and kind of disconnect my actions from God's character, if that makes sense.
Yes, yes. And I love that journey of understanding that it's not our works, it's his love is there no matter what. And
Yeah.
I think that is such a life transforming understanding when we understand that God loves everything about us, and when we soak in his presence and knowing how much he loves us, then on the inside things start to slowly like transform. It's not like, oh, I have to do this thing. It's, oh, I want my heart's change because I know how much I'm loved,
Yeah.
and I just start kind of doing things because I know how much I'm loved, or I start changing my ways, or it's not out of like force. So
Yeah, absolutely. It like becomes a response to who God already is rather than me trying to prove that I'm worthy.
yes. And it's okay that we're human, and we do make mistakes, and that's life, is going
Totally.
through things and figuring things out. So I love that transformation. And I want to hear about how you met your husband. Your family's so cute. I've been following you on social media. So can you share that journey of, so you went through this healing process after that relationship in college, and then what did it look like, after that, and preparing to meet your husband, and then once you finally met him, we want to hear the
Yeah.
story.
Yes, absolutely. So it's kind of a crazy story. And it's just totally God. It's like one of those things where it's like, okay, well, God just knew because like I said, I had sworn off dating. I was like, I'm not interested. Relationships are risky. I'd rather just do my own thing, have the freedom to just do what I feel called to do and not worry about the mess of getting involved with somebody else. Like it was very extreme. And I was so stubborn about it that I was not open to any input from anybody. Like I had friends who would try to set me up on dates and I was like, no, this guy doesn't, like I have this vision of if I ever date anybody again, I'm going to have to know. God's going to have to make it so obvious or it's just I'm not even going to waste my time. I was very just dramatic about that. But I decided that I was going to go and do this missions school, the short term missions program called Youth with a Mission, YWAM, if you guys have heard of that. And so I went and actually okay, hold on, pause. Let me back up a little bit. This is the crazy part. When I was dating my toxic boyfriend in college, we performed at an open mic night. We were both musicians. And at that open mic night, my now husband was also performing by himself.
Oh,
So
cool.
that's actually the first time we met.
Interesting.
But it was just in passing. And my
Mhm.
boyfriend and I at the time, we broke up the next week. And I had no contact with my husband now, Christopher, until the following year.
Ooh,
So a
okay.
year passes. So this
Wow.
whole year is when I'm being super dramatic with God, like, I'm never dating. You're going to have to write it in the sky, you know? And so a year later, Christopher reaches out to me and we just basically realized we had a ton of mutual friends. And we were like, oh, random. Like, I didn't know you knew so and so. And like, how did we not realize that we had all this in common? And so we just met up for coffee as friends, like strictly as friends. When we tell this story, people are always like, yeah, sure. But really, it was like just purely,
Did he
hey,
add you on like Facebook or something or Instagram or?
yeah. Yeah. And
Okay,
so, well,
okay.
it turns out we had so many mutual friends. So he was
Yeah.
actually friends with my best friend when he was in high school and like just all of these crazy random things. So, another just wild part of this story was I have a friend that I met in college from Taiwan. And she was visiting me in Texas at the time. And this is when Christopher had reached out to reconnect with me and like plan a coffee meeting, hangout thing. And so my friend's with me visiting. She's like, who are you talking to? And I was like, oh, this guy, Christopher Hughes. It just like, we have these mutual friends. She was like, oh, yeah, I know that guy. I was like, you're literally from Taiwan. I don't think we're talking about the same person. She's like, no, no, we went to fifth grade together in Taiwan. And I was like, you're kidding. What? So turns out, yeah, they actually did.
Wow.
He grew up in Asia because his parents were missionaries. So he
Wow.
went to school with my friend
Okay.
and he moved back to the States when he started high school and moved randomly from he was born in Florida, lived in Asia for 10 years, and then randomly moved to the same city in Texas that I grew up in. So when we reconnected, we're just like our minds are blown once we finally sit down for coffee and are realizing how in the world have we never met before, because like we've literally been in the same places at the same time, or we know people who are connected, and just very random. But at the time, I had told him, like, hey, I'm doing this mission school. This was the summer. And I was telling him when we were hanging out, like, I'm leaving in January for 6 months. I'm going overseas. I'm doing this missions thing. So, like, I don't know. We can hang out when I get back if you still want to be friends. And he was like, yeah, sounds great. And so we formed this friendship. And over the next few weeks, I started developing feelings for him. And I was shocked because I was like, no, I'm not doing this. But what really stood out to me was that it was not high stakes at all. Like there was no pressure around our hangouts at all. Like I came from having so much pressure on every single date or every single guy I talked to, like trying to figure out, is this the one? Are we going to get married? Could this be my husband? And now I'm hanging out with this Christopher guy and I'm like, he's chill. And I realize, wait a minute, I actually feel really safe around him. Like I don't feel any pressure. I don't feel like these high standard things. And I'm actually really drawn to how peaceful his presence is to me. And like all of these weird things that I never had experienced before. And I did not expect or even want at the time, if I'm being honest. But we had a talk about it, like the DTR, and we realized we both had feelings for each other. But I was about to leave. Like we were going to be long distance for 6 months if we were going to do this. And I was like, okay, here's the deal. Like, this is what I feel like God is calling me to do. And, all through the singleness season, I had been healing and really getting real about my relationship with the Lord again. And I just wasn't willing to compromise that. So Christopher was like, for sure, I get that. I respect that. I'll be here when you get back. And at first I was like, okay, this guy's just playing games. Like he'll probably date other people and I'm gone and then we can reconnect when I'm home. But because he grew up a missionary's kid, he understood the whole experience and was willing to just literally wait for me while I was gone,
Wow.
which was crazy to me.
Mm-hmm.
But it was so genuine. Like it was just so sincere, the things that he was saying and like his willingness to just be like, yeah, that's awesome. I love that you're just doing what God called you to do. And so I'm starting to freak out. And there were little things that I had prayed about and told no one about. Like, I, this is like semi embarrassing, funny, but just so honest. When I was in my singleness season and just really convinced I never was going to date again, God started giving me dreams of my future kids. And I was like, I feel like this is from you, God. Like, I'm not really like a woo woo dreams kind of person, but like, it was just one of those moments where it was like, I'm not listening to God during the daytime. So he's just talking to me while I'm asleep because that's the only time he is going to be able to get through to me, kind of thing. And so I was like, I love that. I'm totally down to adopt. It's going to be great. But then God's like, no, I have someone for you. It's going to be, started like speaking to me about restoring the pain from my past and healing my
Wow.
relationships. And like, there's going to be a family that comes from this on the other side. And I was just like, I'll believe it when I see it, you know, like I don't want to get my hopes up is kind of
Right.
where I was at the time. And then as I had prayed about that and was having these dreams, I started feeling like God was telling me more about my future and just, you know, dropping hints like, this is what's going to happen. And if this is the only way that you'll trust me, I'll show you. So I started feeling like, okay, if I have a son, his name's going to be Judah. So fast forward to when I'm hanging out with Christopher. And like the first time we had our actual first official date, he just randomly asked, hey, do you ever think about what you'd name your kids one day? And of course, I'm not going to be like, yes, actually, God gave me a dream.
Right.
I was like,
You don't wanna
no,
be
I
weird on
never
the
think
first
about
date.
that. Yeah, I was like, no,
No.
not really. Do you? He was like, yeah, I don't know. I think it'd be really cool to call my son Judah someday. Like, I just really like that name. And I was like, huh?
What?
And then we just moved on. I was like, okay, moving on.
Whoa.
We can't talk about this. This is too weird, you
Right.
know. So it was things
Wow.
like that where God just made it so clear, which I had prayed because I was terrified of getting into another relationship, getting my hopes up, getting invested, and then being heartbroken again, you know?
Yep.
So there were little moments like that where I was just like, okay, this is so obviously God. Like I couldn't have just made this up, you know? So we ended up dating. We did long distance. And when I got home, we got engaged and got married. And that's kind of like the dating part of our story. And, you know, I ended up telling him about my abuse experience. And it was one of the scariest things I ever did. Cause at that point
Mm.
I was like, okay, I really could see maybe a future with this guy, but he doesn't know this thing yet. And I was so scared to tell him. But when I did, he was so gracious and like just kind and loving and not what I expected, which, you know, like I don't know what I really expected him to say, like, ew, never mind, I'm done with you. But he was just like, I'm so sorry that happened. I'm here for you. And I just want you to know I don't see you any differently. I know that's a part of your story, but I really see how God is working in your life and that's not who you are. And just that was his response to my brokenness over and over again, which is actually a huge part of the way God used him to heal me because I started to believe I could be lovable again. And like I said, it's been an ongoing journey from there. It's not been like this picture perfect, happily ever after, but it has been a way that God has continued to heal me through my husband, if that makes sense. And
Wow.
it's been really sweet and unexpected in that way.
Oh, I love that so much. And I l- h- I've been I feel like God has been speaking to me about how I think he's been preparing me for marriage eventually, and just the understanding that when you do come together with the right person, it will open up a deeper level in relationship with God for you. And it sounds like that's what this dating process was like with your husband, how he showed so much grace and love. And you
Mm,
said with your brokenness, because we all have areas of shame, of brokenness, of just things that we deal with as humans. And I think that's so beautiful how he was able to say like, no, like you are loved and I'm here
mm.
for you. It doesn't make me view you any different. And I think that that's so beautiful. So could you talk a little more about maybe how marriage has maybe given you a different perspective on maybe on your relationship with God, or things that maybe it has taught you that you were kind of unexpected, that were a little
Oh yeah.
unexpected?
Oh my goodness. Yes, for sure. I love that question. I think um it was really key for me in our dating experience to see how my husband responded to those things in brokenness. And this is something that I think about when I'm talking to people about dating and like finding their future spouse, like how to make that choice. It's like the way they respond to your brokenness now is how they're going to respond to brokenness down the line because it's going to happen again. Like there are going to
Wow.
be more moments of brokenness that you have to humbly come and share with your spouse. You know, like if you're in a healthy marriage relationship where you let each other see all of that, I mean, it's an ongoing thing. And so like I said, when we got married, it wasn't happily ever after. It was pretty much very quickly, oh my goodness, a new level of my healing is coming up. And I feel triggered all the time
Mm.
because I felt pretty safe when we were dating. But I realized once we got married and we're living together that part of the reason I felt so safe is because we were long distance most of our dating. And I didn't really have to show a whole lot of my vulnerable self, like my day to day real life humanness, until we were together 24/7.
Yep.
And then things started coming up where he would try to be helpful and it would just annoy me because I felt like I needed to just do things on my own, kind of as a self-preservation thing. And it was really hard for me to let him in, not just to the big broken areas, but like to every part, like day-to-day life. Because when you say yes to someone and you get married, you're sharing everything with them. I mean, you're sharing not only your body, your life, your schedule, but also how you respond to every kind of event, stress, joyful moments, like how you share and how you grieve together and how you process the ups and downs of life. Like it's a lot and it's a learning experience for sure. And because we were long distance and because for most of that, or I would say like half of that, I was overseas and we really weren't talking a whole lot because I was, out on the mission field doing stuff. It was just really interesting learning how to let him see so much of who I was, like just in the day to day. And there were so many moments where I was again met by grace from him, where I realized I screwed up and I was like, I'm so sorry I overreacted again, or I'm sorry that I projected this pain on you, or like I expected you to act a certain way and I'm just making assumptions and it's just causing division and it's causing tension that was unnecessary. And it was a struggle for a really long time. And I'll be really honest, it was so funny. Actually, we did pre-marriage counseling, and where we went for counseling, that premarital counseling, they schedule a 6-week kind of checkup after you've been married to come in and see how things are going. And I think that is so smart because we came in for that checkup, and by 6 weeks in, we had realized all this stuff was coming up that we didn't expect until we got there, And so we just kept going to counseling after that for a year. And it was so helpful to have somebody facilitating those conversations about expectations and how to respond, like helping my husband process, like, what do I do? Like, how do I help Hannah if she's having a hard time with mental health or if she's feeling stressed? Like, I was still working through my trauma responses to stress and overwhelm. So it was like, we're newly married. He doesn't know how to help me with that. And I don't know how to like not lash out at him or like take it out on him when I'm feeling that way. So it was just a long time where we had to work through that. And I mean, if I'm being super honest, the first several years of our marriage were really, really tough because I had still a lot of stuff to work through. And it was, the thing is with healing, it comes in layers. And I think sometimes in the faith world, we expect for healing to be a one and done situation where it's like God came and he healed me and I never have to deal with it again. And that's just not been my personal experience. For me, it's actually been an ongoing, like it comes up a lot every time I'm in a new situation where things come up and I'm triggered or I realize, oh, like this is putting me in a situation where I don't know how to respond in a healthy way yet. And so in marriage, over and over again, I had to relearn that I'm safe and like we can get through this together. I don't have to do this on my own anymore. Like I actually have somebody who's on my team and not against me. We're not fighting each other. Like we're fighting together in this. And so that was a big learning curve for me. But honestly, we've been so blessed by mentors and counselors and just people that we've invited into our process. Obviously, like in marriage or dating, whatever relationship, you don't want to just spill your guts and drama to whoever. But it was really important for us to invite people in and help us and kind of counsel us and guide us through those hard moments.
Yes, definitely. And yeah, thank you for sharing so much about that because I think in our culture we have really, I don't know if the word is romanticized marriage or we have created a fairy tale of it. And so I think that's why single people in our generation can have such a hard time with being patient because we want that fairy tale. We want to have that happy ever after. But like you said, with any relationship we enter into with marriage, there are going to be things that come up and life still goes on and the things that we are dealing with still go on and healing it takes time. So you're so right about that. And I mean, you had sexual abuse in your past, you went through a toxic relationship, and I know you talked about some of the things that you both were doing with counseling and stuff like that. But worth did you recognize kind of maybe defense mechanisms, or I know you mentioned triggers or things that would come up or ways that you would react in your marriage because of things that happened in the past? And I guess how did you deal with that, or how did you overcome that, or still if you're dealing with that today, what would you say to
Yeah.
someone that may be dealing with that or may be nervous in the future for marriage, uh
Mhm.
to understand how to work through that?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. I think for me, it was just having a counselor or mentor, someone who could show me my blind spots, like maybe the responses that were so second nature to me that I didn't realize I was doing as an unhealthy coping mechanism. But also just observing patterns in the past where I realized, okay, I'm doing the same thing every time and I always wind up in the same place, like the spiral afterwards. So, what's going on here? And I just learned myself that when I feel stressed or overwhelmed or threatened in any way, like when one of those triggers comes up, I isolate. Like that's usually how I handle stress, and I like shut down and I shut everyone else out. And of course, in a relationship, that's not really going to work out long term, right? Like if you're continually shutting the other person out in hard times and hard moments where you really are meant to be leaning on each other, that just causes a lot of division. And it was really tough for my husband because he wanted to be there for me, but I wasn't letting him. I thought like, no, and even coming back to, in my mind, I was coming back to those past moments where I felt like, okay, I messed up or I'm going through something. I'm too broken. If anybody sees this, they're going to leave. So I just need to shut down and keep it to myself and close it up because I don't want to be alone, but at the same time like I'm making myself be alone by isolating. And so I just realized I was doing that as my coping mechanism, but actually it wasn't doing anything helpful for me except making me feel like maybe I had some control. And at the end of the day, I just had to learn, like, as vulnerable and hard and scary as it is, to retrain that process in me so that if I had a moment come up where I noticed something came up that I was stressed or like it made me feel emotionally like turmoil, like whatever situation, instead of shutting down, I would start inviting my husband into that, or even just simply saying like, I'm really struggling with this. I don't know what I need, but I just want you to know, like, I'm having a really hard day. Can you just pray for me? Or can you just sit with me? Can you just be with me? Can we just go do something together? And I just had to relearn this idea, or like really learn for the first time how to let someone be in the pain and be in the brokenness with me. Because I thought perfect marriage equals no tension, no drama, no, like nothing, no conflict, no upset. It just needs to be smooth sailing. But really that's not true. I think we can admit like that's just not how it is in real life. And so I had to learn how to let him into that with me. And honestly, that's what led to a lot of our healing. And this year, actually in October, we'll be married 7 years. And I can honestly say with
Congrats.
so much confidence, thank you. I can honestly say, like, we didn't know if we would make it at some moments, but we
Mhm.
are at the best place we've ever been in our marriage. And I think it's because we just chose, and we've talked very openly about our story. And we've both just said we've chosen to commit to each other through the hard. Like we'd rather do it imperfectly together than give up and go our separate ways and just give up when that would be the easy thing to do. But we've just gone through the hard together. And that for me has made all the difference, is just learning to let him in, and then also learning to be there for him when he needs it too, and not letting conflict or any kind of tension turn us from each other, but rather bring us closer together, if that makes sense.
Yes, I love that. And that is an adjustment with relationships, and I know that's something I'll have to get used to, is you get used to dealing with everything kind of on your own,
Yeah.
and then really letting someone else into all of that. That's a big step. And even outside of marriage, you talked about when you were in college and you opened up to your family members or friends or counselors. I mean, even that, I think just being vulnerable with the people around you and just saying, I don't want to carry this burden alone anymore.
Mhm.
that makes such a big difference in our life. I mean, there are things from my past that I haven't even shared on the podcast yet. Maybe I will one day, but when I'm ready. But there are things that, I've carried by myself, and finally over years I finally opened up to close friends and close family, and that it made so much of a difference in my life,
Mhm.
knowing like, okay, I don't need to carry this alone anymore. So I love that
Right.
in marriage too. It's now we're carrying these burdens together, and
Yep.
um you know choosing someone and being with someone that has the same mindset and is open to that. I think that's so important for emotional health and um our peace, and that's so good. And so along those lines, I've been thinking about this lately because I'm in my like peaceful single girl era right now, and I'm really enjoying it. And I still want my husband one of these days. I know God will bring him at the right time, but like, okay, so you have two kids and you have a husband, like you have a community. You I could imagine that it's kind of challenging to have that time to yourself sometimes, to like recharge or to have that time with the Lord. And like, I guess, how do you manage that? Like, how do you manage your time now? Because I think that's something that I'm definitely going to have to make an adjustment on or figure out.
Yeah.
I think that's going to be a big change for me because I used to have a really hard time being alone when I was younger. But now that the past 3 years, I've really embraced kind of my alone time with God, and doing things on my own. And so, again, I think it's just going to be a bigger transition than it was for me when I was younger, when I enter into a new relationship. And so, yeah,
Yeah.
what's your advice there? How do you kind of recharge or find that
Uh,
time with yourself?
yeah, that's such a good question. Well, I am an introvert by nature. And so I always love my time to myself. It is definitely more challenging now that I am married with two kids, two little kids, I should say, especially. But I think for me, just learning how to fill my cup in, small, tangible ways rather than, I was talking about how when I was triggered or struggling, like my unhealthy coping mechanism was to shut everybody out and isolate. That doesn't do anything for me. But I know now that time alone in a healthy way looks like for me, just doing something I enjoy, whether it's taking a bath or doing some skincare, self care, reading a book, or going to have coffee with a friend or going for a walk. Like for me in this season, which is actually something that my a mentor told me was like, how can you fill your cup, like really, she used the example of juicing. It's like, how can you squeeze the most out of the limited time and energy that you have in this season because it's full. And like as life changes or jobs, relationships, and our roles change, like it's not like we'll always have a spa day to ourselves or like, a luxurious day to just do whatever we want. Like that's few and far between for me these days. However, I do find little pockets of time, and my husband supports me in that. And so, like, one little way for me now is that we know Monday nights, this is kind of silly, but like, it's what works for us. Monday nights, I watch this show on YouTube. It's like a murder mystery and makeup, and it's like my thing. And it like slowly turned into this ritual for me where I've just,
Love it.
we literally put it on the calendar. Like, Monday night, mom's going to take a bath. She's doing her self care time, and that's my
That's
space.
awesome.
Whether I actually get the full evening to myself or like once the kids go to bed, I just have some time to myself. Like my husband really supports me and helps hold me accountable to make sure that I have that space because I can very easily like get into work mode and just keep myself busy. And so, yeah, I just find little pockets of time where it's like, okay, do I have a minute to myself, like to just sneak away and read my Bible in the quiet? And like, can my husband take the kids so that I can go have a little bit of time for myself? And it's been really nice. Like it definitely looks different in this season, but having the support from my husband and then just finding little ways to fill my cup has been super helpful.
I love that. I'm definitely going to keep that in mind and take that into my future. I love that.
Yes.
So, what is something that you're thankful for in this season that's really
Oh
sticking
man.
out to you?
Gosh, there's so much. We've actually just come out of a really challenging season. We actually just moved our family from Texas to Colorado. And so we're adjusting to this totally new life. I've never lived anywhere besides Texas and close to family, but we're here, and I'm just really thankful that it's been a smooth transition. And there are still challenges. Like, we're still very much in the adjustment phase, but we've just been so blessed. Like, we feel very grateful to see God in the friends that we've made already, and like job opportunities that we've had here, and just even like seeing the joy in our kids, like our son being able to play outside here, and just kind of honestly, just the little sweet moments have felt like such a gift in this season.
I love that. And it
Yeah.
is, there's so much joy when we really, and we talked about this in the podcast episode that we recorded on your podcast, which we're going to get to in a minute, how to find Hannah. Um, but yeah, when we really take time to enjoy the little moments, the small moments in our lives, it's just so transformative. And
Yeah.
it makes all the difference when we can just be grateful for those little moments. And we realize like the big things are awesome too, but the little moments add up, and it can bring you so much joy when we really concentrate on those little moments.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
yes, yes. So I guess before we end, I just want to ask you, like, is there any other piece of advice or thing that maybe you didn't say that you want to make sure you say to all the people listening and the people that are in their single season, or the people that desire a husband and a marriage one day and a family? Like, is there anything that you want to leave them with?
Hmm. I think I would just say that there's no brokenness in your life that God can't restore and use for his glory. Like, the pieces of my story that I felt so much shame, I have seen now, years down the line, how God has just completely changed my life. And I'm not saying that I'm perfect now and I never struggle. Excuse me. But the way that God has healed those places that I thought would never even be, like, I'd never even see the other side of my struggles, like that has been more than I could have ever dreamed. Like the Bible talks about how he can do more than we could ever ask, think, or imagine, like by his spirit working in us. And I've just seen that over and over again in my life because um, I'll share with you guys, but I wrote a book about my story, and I shared about all of my struggles except my experience with abuse, because for the longest time, it was the one thing I didn't want anyone to know.
Mm.
But a big part of my healing was God saying, there's no pressure, of course. Like, you don't have to spill your guts about every single thing, but anything that you don't share is really just robbing you deeper healing and me of greater glory in that piece. And obviously, like, when we get to that point in our healing and we feel that it's safe to share. But I've just seen that over and over in my life. And there's a quote from Ann Voskamp. She says, "Shame dies when stories are told in safe spaces." And I just want to say, like, if you feel broken, find a mentor, find a counselor, find a friend who can just walk with you through it. Because if you can learn how to embrace the broken pieces of your story and just be in the process with someone, I feel like that'll set you up so well for having a healthy marriage and relationship down the line, because there's still going to be broken and hard moments. But if we are able to just be present with the Lord, no matter what season we're in, and let him like bring us the right people in that season too, it will make such a world of difference. So yeah, I think that's what I would leave them with.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing. And honestly, it's so refreshing hearing from you and your story, because you're so real and open and vulnerable, and I know you have a good pure heart that it just shows through the video and through our conversation. So thank you so much for being so open and sharing. I know this will be a blessing to whoever hears. And where can people find you? So you talked about your book. We know you have
Yeah.
a podcast. So let us know how we can find you.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, I'm just honored. Thank you so much for making space for me to come and share and talk with you. I've just loved this. I feel honored. But yes, I have my book. I have actually two books. One is a devotional called Love Is, and then my other one is Waking Up, Living Open. And it's the story that I share about my testimony, but it's really about the power of our stories. And then my podcast is the continuation of that conversation, where I actually decided to open up about my experience with abuse, but also just the continuation of our stories and being in the process. So it's called the By Word Show, which comes from the verse in Revelation where we overcome by the blood of the Lamb, but also by the words of our testimony. So that's where you can find me. Also hanging out on Instagram and TikTok at the Hannah Hughes. And yeah, I would love to say hi to you guys. Come hang out.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Hannah. It was wonderful talking, and we will talk soon.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me.
Bye, everyone. Thank you. We'll see you next time.